Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a huge one, the story of our modern world. I mean, how did we get here? From a massive shift in thinking to a globally connected, well, us. All right, so how are we going to tackle this beast of a story? We've broken it down into 5 key chapters. Think of them as the dominoes that had to fall to get us to where we are today. So, where does this whole story kick off? Well, you might be surprised. It's not with a big battle or a king's decree. It all starts with an idea, a totally radical new way of looking at humanity's place in the universe that honestly changed everything. And that big idea? It's called humanism. Now, for centuries, everything, and I mean everything, was about God and the afterlife. But humanism? It just flipped that whole script. It said, hey, what about us? What about human beings, our reason, our art, our achievements, right here on Earth? It was a massive, massive shift. And look, this wasn't just some small tweak. We're talking about a complete 180 in how the Western world saw itself. Suddenly, the ultimate authority wasn't just the church anymore. It was human reason and asking why. You see it in the art, which starts celebrating the human body instead of just religious scenes. And this is huge. People started writing in their own languages, French, German, English, not just Latin, which was only for the elites. All of a sudden, big ideas could reach way more people. So you can probably guess what happened next, right? When people start questioning everything, it's only a matter of time before they start questioning the biggest power of all, the Catholic Church. And that's exactly what happened. This new sense of individual importance, coming straight from humanism, directly fueled a huge challenge to the Church's authority. And that led to a split that changed religion in Europe forever, the Reformation. And you know what poured gasoline on this fire of new ideas? Technology. Gutenberg's printing press, oh my gosh, this was an absolute game changer. Suddenly, a radical idea from, say, Martin Luther wasn't stuck in one little town. Nope, it could be printed thousands of times and spread across Europe like a viral post today. It gave the Reformation incredible momentum. Okay, so you've got these incredible world-changing ideas spreading everywhere. But what happens when they stop being just words on a page and people start acting on them in the real world? Well, you get revolutions, the kind that don't just change governments. They topple kings and rebuild entire societies from the ground up. And that's exactly what we saw. This new way of thinking was like a spark hitting a powder keg of political frustration. First in America, then in France, you had ordinary people fired up by thinkers like Rousseau and Thomas Paine, just standing up and saying, no more. They weren't going to be subjects of a king anymore. They were citizens, and they demanded a voice in their own future. Now, this is the really crucial part. Even though the American and French revolutions were very different, they were both running on the same fuel, the same set of absolutely explosive ideas. The idea that power belongs to the people, not some king. The idea that you're loyal to your nation of fellow citizens, not just one guy on a throne. I mean, these are the fundamental building blocks of almost every modern country today. But here's the thing. While all this political drama was unfolding, redrawing maps and beheading kings, there was another revolution happening, a much quieter one at first. It was happening in workshops and factories, and it was a revolution of machines. And believe me, this one would end up changing everyday life even more than any battle. Yeah, this industrial revolution wasn't just about a few new inventions. It was a chain reaction that completely rewired society. It changed where people lived, flooding them from the countryside into brand new massive cities. It changed how they worked, moving from homes to giant factories. And it created totally new social classes, capitalists, workers, a new middle class that, let's be honest, we're still talking about today. Okay, let's take a step back and see what we've got. You now have these powerful, unified nations born out of revolution, and they have the industrial muscle to build, anything. This created a new kind of hunger, an absolutely massive appetite for resources, for markets, for global power. So what happens when you combine this new national pride with industrial-scale power? What's the result? The answer? A fierce global free-for-all. These newly powerful nations started looking outwards, desperately seeking raw materials to feed their factories and new customers to buy their stuff. The competition was on. And this whole situation kicks off what we now call the Age of Imperialism. It was basically a frantic scramble. The industrialized nations of Europe just started carving up the rest of the world, especially Africa and Asia, trying to build these huge global empires. And you have to understand, the reasons behind this were a really dangerous mix. A toxic cocktail, really. Sure, a big part of it was economic. They needed the resources. But it was also about intense national pride. This feeling of, my country is better than yours. There was a religious angle, this idea of a civilizing mission. And then there was this really ugly, twisted new idea called social Darwinism. This belief that some nations were just naturally fitter and had the right to rule over weaker ones. It's a pretty disturbing mix. So, you've got global competition, supercharged nationalism, and for the first time in history, massive armies with industrially produced weapons. Where's this all heading? It felt inevitable. And it was. It led to a war on a scale that nobody on Earth could have even imagined. And it all kicked off with a single event. One gunshot in Sarajevo. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914. That was the spark. But the fuse was already lit. This complex web of military alliances, built up over years of rivalry and mistrust, just snapped. And it dragged Europe and then the entire world into the Great War, what we now call World War I. After millions died in the trenches, the world said never again. They created their very first attempt at a global peacekeeping group, the League of Nations. But honestly, it was a disaster. It had no power, no army to enforce its rules. Some of the most important countries, like the US, never even joined. And its rules made it almost impossible to get anything done. So when aggressive powers started pushing the boundaries in the 1930s, the League was completely useless. It was too weak, and it couldn't stop the world from sliding into an even bigger, even deadlier war. All right, so after the absolute devastation of 2 world wars, the world that crawled out of the rubble was different, completely different. It was now facing a new kind of global fight, but also a more desperate need to figure out how to work together. The old empires of Europe were basically shattered, and in their place, 2 new superpowers rose up, the United States and the Soviet Union, and the world was suddenly split right down the middle. You had 2 opposing camps, each with a totally different idea of how the world should work, locked in this tense, decades-long stare-down that we call the Cold War. But while this big superpower struggle was going on, something else was happening. Those old European empires, they were finally falling apart. They were broke from the wars, and powerful nationalist movements were rising up in their colonies in Africa and Asia. People were demanding their freedom, and they won it. The map of the world was being completely redrawn, again. And rising from the ashes of World War II came attempt number 2 at global peace, a much stronger, more serious attempt, the United Nations. Its whole reason for being, its number 1 job, was to make sure a Third World War never, ever happened. So when you look back, you can see it, right? This incredible chain reaction from a new idea about human potential all the way to the founding of the UN. This history directly created the world we're all living in right now, with all its connections, its conflicts, and its amazing opportunities. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the next big link in that chain going to be? What forces are shaping our future right now?